Okay.
Any other questions? So Jeremy, you're going to pass the baton on, or?
Yeah, to Greg, and then I think I'd have one closing slide.
Okay.
That in hindsight, I probably should just put up here in the front, but I'll be back up.
Right.
Thank you, Jeremy. So I'm going to move relatively quickly because I notice we're being kind of low on time.
So just to give you a heads up, so I think the port CEO has indicated we've got maybe another 15 minutes, so just for time management purposes,
Okay.
just letting you know that.
So here I just wanted to briefly touch on the regional flood management plan that WestSafeCA has been working in partnership within our region. And in the green in the graphic there is the entire region, and right down the middle of it is the corridor there, that's the yellow bypass. It was definitely a focus for our regional planning effort for looking at projects from the ground up that could be potentially be implemented within our geographic region. Through that effort and the publication of our regional flood management plan back in July of 2014, and working since then with the Department of Water Resources, we've actually come up with what we coined our locally preferred plan in discussions with DWR management. And there was quite a bit of alignment with what plans we were able to cobble together within our region with what they were looking at in their alternatives in the basin-wide feasibility study. And so actually one of the alternatives
I would ask of you to put it out in whatever media you might. And so I've brought information. We have a crowdfunding website at YOLO Food Truck at my deposited gift site. And that's a very easy way that in a week we've already raised $5,000. And we need to raise $84,000 to have a truck that people can drive without a Class C license. And that's important because the food bank is mostly volunteer run, and there's only one person with a Class C license in the food bank. So I hope you'll make your constituency know, your friends know, anyone you have social media with, know of this opportunity to help heal hunger in our county. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
May I leave this with someone to have?
Yes, please, with the clerk, and she'll make sure that we all get it, but also the folks that handle our communications and media systems as well, so. Sure. All right, with that, then we're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. We first observe, if it's not already obvious, that Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma and Councilmember Johannesson are both out of town on business, are not able to be with us this evening. But so council communications, Ms. Sandine.
Thank you, Mayor Baldwin. So the City School 2x2 met this past Monday evening. There was a brief discussion about the Washington Unified School District's board's interest in having their meetings broadcast and streamed online and archived similar to our council meetings, and our staff will assist the school district staff in helping figure out what might be possible for them. We also discussed rotating meetings and meeting staffing between the city and the district offices, so our next meeting, Mayor will be actually at the district office in December. And more substantially, though, we discussed the Bright Park Phase 1 improvements, and this item will be going forward to the school board for consideration in November. The district is working on some draft amendments as well to the overall joint use agreement, which the city will then review. And finally, we discussed future items for discussion, a report on the city's apprenticeship program, information sharing about the school district's career technical education program, and also a possible West Sac Promise type program. So those will be coming forward, I think, at our next few meetings. Also, the Port Commission met tonight and heard a presentation on the status of the Sacramento River Basin-wide feasibility study by the California Department of Water Resources. Updating of the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is underway now, scheduled for adoption in 2017. And we also reviewed the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program. We had a discussion about the potential of expanding the Yolo Bypass and also the use of the Deepwater Ship Channel for possible flood control. And we all provided input and shared issues that and concerns that may help with the scoping of the discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kristoff, any reports?
Let's see. Last Wednesday, LAFCO met, and there was really nothing of any significance to report back, so no.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tuttle really wanted me to report on this, so I will. The SACOG Transportation Committee meeting is tomorrow. We have 3 projects that are being proposed for funding in the regional funding competition round that will be up for over the next several months. So $1.1 million for the Sycamore Trail overpass design work, not the construction, but the design. $1.9 million for the Riverfront Street extension, or 1.7, and then the last is $2.3 million for road rehab and complete streets. So some significant resources for important projects in the city that will be up tomorrow. All right, with that, then we'll proceed to item 1C, which is appointments to boards and commissions. I just have one, and that's I'd like to reappoint Christopher Ledesma to the Sacramento Yolo Port District Commission. There's no application on file, but I believe you're familiar with his background and qualifications. He served on the Port Commission since his election to the City Council.
I'll move that appointment.
Second.
All right, if there's no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Just a reminder, the Port Commission seats are, due to a quirk in the law, they are 4-year terms from the moment of appointment. So they're not concurrent with our terms. If somebody resigns and we appoint somebody new, they start a whole new 4-year clock. There's no term of office. So our council members' terms expire in odd times. I think next up is Mr. Johannesson in the fall. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 7. Are there any items on consent to remove or any items for separate question or comment?
Move consent.
All right, the consent agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Some big stuff on that consent agenda. I know consent is a way for us to expedite our agenda, but obviously the major items on flood, on the reorganization of the city government itself, and also just to call out the cops grant in particular. I think we've noted it in a prior meeting, the significant win and the help of Congresswoman Matsui in securing that cops grant, and this makes that real. All right, item 8 then is a continued public hearing, second reading and adoption of ordinance 15-7 approving a development agreement between the city and the Sacramento Yolo Port District on the Stone Lock property in Southport. Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Normally, a second reading of an ordinance would be on consent agenda, but given that the public hearing remained opened and was continued from September 2nd, we're asking that you resume the public hearing tonight, take any public comment, close the hearing, and then we recommend adoption as outlined in the recommended action. So I do not have any other staff report beyond that.
All right,
Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on item 8? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Turn to the council. For a motion.
I have nothing new to add,
Recommended action.
and I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 9 is consideration of final unaudited year-end budget numbers for fiscal year 2014-15 and related fiscal actions.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just give me 1 second to get PowerPoint up and running. So as the council is aware, staff provides a quarterly budget report that is on consent. And then once a year, staff comes to the council, a minimum once a year, to provide you with the end of the year unaudited numbers. When we get the audited numbers, we produce the CAFR, which we then obviously present to the council. So we're here to do that tonight with the end of fiscal year 14-15. So quick agenda, we're going to cover the general fund. We want to look at the budget to actuals, property sales, taxes, and expenses. We have 2 items we're seeking direction on. One is the moving of $370,652 monies received from the state for state mandated costs going back to 2002. Another situation where the state borrowed money from us and is now repaying us old debt. So that's one-time money that we will not get. We do have an amount of money in the current budget for what we anticipate getting for this 2-year budget. So this is simply extra money, and we're recommending that go into our one-time money fund, which is Fund 107. And then, as the council may recall, when the budget struggles were going on, we were using ziggurat parking money to help balance the budget and avoid additional layoffs. We do not need that money to balance the budget in 14-15, which is the good news. And so we're asking the council for permission to move that money back into the ziggurat parking fund. As the council is aware, there's clearly been some discussions about the parking in the city and a parking authority, and so this would be some good seed money for that down the road. Taking a look at where we actually ended up, you can see we projected that at the end of 14-15, we would have about $1,185,000, including the carryover balance from 13-14. We actually, our final numbers turn out to be a bit higher. You'll see a 1.7, but that includes the 370,000. What you'll also note there, I guess the significant thing is our property taxes clearly are gone up 275,000 over even what we projected, so that's good news that they continue to move. Probably an important point is we're still well below where we were in 07-08, so we haven't really recovered fully. Sales taxes have been a surprising positive in that they're 573,000 over even what we projected. Council may recall we projected a loss in in our projections based upon our sales consultant because of the loss of HD Supply and Macy's.com. But even with those losses of about $1.4 million in sales tax, we're $500,000 ahead. So sales tax are definitely helping the budget very much so. Other taxes are up a little bit, revenues are down. The interesting thing is some numbers are higher and some numbers are lower, some we control, some we don't, but on a $43 million budget, we're off by about 146,000, which is less than 1/3%. So I feel very good about the staff work here. Expenses, important to note here on expenses that for the period of the last 5 years when we've been in the economic downturn, in addition to reductions in staffing, we've tried to ask all the departments to keep their expenses at about 98%. And that was what we projected. We're under budget, but we're not at 98%. We've essentially spent the money that was allocated by the council for our expenses. And given, the work levels that are definitely cranking up, and the still, reduced staff, I think it's a fair assumption that we should not be asking departments to stay at 98%. If we allocate the money, we have to watch that we stay within the budget, but I don't think we need to actually try to come under budget each year. It doesn't mean we're not that's not all of our individual goals, but I don't think we should mandate that. So we're fine on expenses, although we're a little high. You'll see a negative number there in the unaudited numbers of $263,000. We'll talk about that when we talk about Public Works Engineering and Community Development. That's an additional money that we have to take out of the general fund, because at the end of the year, you can't have a fund in negative, so money's got to come from somewhere. So you can see the number in 15-16 with this increase. It's $516,000 at the end of 15-16, 16-17. Normally, at the end of the second year of a budget, it would be at zero. We obviously budget things to be balanced. Now we have an extra 500. But again, if you take the 370 out, the next slide will show you really, if the council follows the recommendation, we have about an extra 146,000. So very good news that we're out of the really challenging times. As the mayor has mentioned a number of times, we're coming back obviously slower than we went into this recession, and I think that's what we're projecting really for the next few years. It's just this slow, steady growth. So that's our general fund. So now we're going to look at community development and public work engineering, and what we're asking the council to do here is really look at the money that we've had to use from the general fund over the past 5 years to continue to get the work done and not reduce staff to the level where we didn't have enough people to get the work done. But now that we've got the ship sort of righted in talking to the department directors, Public Works can't charge people more money than it actually costs. So they really are not going to be able to repay the debt. And the same is really true with community development. Community development has done a reorganization, as you know, in this last budget. We're hoping that that's going to fix some of the challenges we faced. When we look at the numbers in the next chart, you'll see that at the end of the day, community development came very close to where we thought they were going to be, but we need an extra 81,000 to basically balance them where they don't have any additional debt. And so this is not money that's gone away. The money's already gone. As the council probably knows, the city manages all of its money in one treasury. So we have money from different sources. They're all accounted for separately, but they're all in one treasury. And so at the end of the year, when we have a debt like this of 81,000, we have to move the money from the general fund, accounting-wise, into the community development fund. The money's gone. So we're simply asking the council to approve writing off those debts, in other words, approving us to move the money from the general fund to those funds so that they start the year at zero when we get the final audited numbers. And then that we come back at the end of the first year of the 2-year budget and we make any adjustments at that time, and then we'll know if we have an ongoing structural problem, we can address it at the mid-year budget and make whatever changes we need to make. Both departments heads have done a really good job in setting up a methodology where they're tracking everyone's time very, very carefully so that we can analyze how much time each department is spending doing really non-billable work, meaning work supporting other departments, so that we know whether the allocation we give them, because there is an allocation in the budget recognizing they do work that's not billable, whether that allocation is correct or not. And if we gave them too much money, we'll get the money back to the general fund. If it's too little, then we can make the adjustment, and we'll be able to monitor it on a more regular basis. This isn't driven completely by our auditors, but I will tell you the auditors have been on us about this debt, saying you have to have a methodology for repaying it, or you have to write the debt off as we're requesting you do tonight. So there, Public Works Engineering came in about 182,000 below. And by the way, just back on community development, if there are some projects that still haven't come in, that didn't come in 13, 14, it didn't come in 14 or 15, that we are hoping will come in 15, 16, but the year's been closed out, so we have to right the ship at this point. We have to get the accounting to be proper at zero. That's why we're asking for that write-off. When that money comes in, there could be, if there may be excess money in our next budget year, the council will have the ability to move that money into the general fund if the council chooses to at that time. Public Works Engineering is at the 182, and so we're asking that what the council action tonight is that whatever the final audited number is, that if it's in the negative, which I think it's fair to say it will be, that we write that off of the books and start them fiscal year at 0. Just wanted one last slide is on the refuge fund. We came to you a couple of years ago and said, hey, we're worried about the refuse fund. It was bleeding $500,000 and $600,000 a year. It had a couple $1 million, so it was going to run out of money. The good news is we've controlled some of the expenses, and you have increases built in starting this year. We only bled 300,000 instead of 600,000, so we're still, looks like we're bleeding 200,000 a year, which means it's probably 8 years, but we do have some fee increases, so we'll just have to monitor this fund. At the moment, it's clearly not balanced on a year-to-year basis, but we have excess revenue, so it's on a watch list, so to speak. Okay, so in conclusion, property taxes are still well below, sales tax coming back very strong. Staff continues to be concerned, as the council has addressed, with our PERS costs, which continue to be increasing, although it is important to note that we are getting more and more employees who are new city employees coming in under PEPRA. And so while the rates of our current employees are going up, there is some savings that we're beginning to see from the PEPRA. Health and retiree costs are relatively flat, but that's due to the caps that the council approved, so that even though healthcare is going up, the unfortunate people paying the money are the employees more, and we've got caps on the retiree health. Very important, I think the employees understand that that this is how we make sure that we can maintain some retiree health by controlling it, and they appreciate that. So I think we will continue to see that. Expenses are right at the budget level. So in conclusion, would like the council to approval on moving the $370,000 to the one-time fund, moving the parking money back into parking, and writing off the audited community development and public works debt when we get those audited numbers. All in all, I think it was a good end of the year.
Can I ask thanks, Phil. Why you're not proposing to the $86,000 that we pulled out of the reserve allocation in order to make our match for the COPS grant, which we had to do quickly. We didn't have a lot of options at that moment in order to get the application in. Why you're not proposing to take 86 out of the 370 and restore the budgeted amount for the reserve? That would seem like that's, had we known now what we knew 2 months ago, we would have applied for the COPS grant with this money, as opposed to reducing our reserve percentage.
To be honest, they sort of two ships passing in the night, I think, a little bit. So I'm not surprised that you're suggesting that, and we certainly could do that. We could absolutely, we have money in the one-time fund. We could increase the general fund reserve because it is a one-time commitment.
Yeah, I mean, we were all we all wanted the COPS grant, so we did what we needed to do, but none of us, including you and the manager, really wanted to set a precedent. This is what we do with our reserve fund, so the quicker we can reverse and correct that, when we have the ability to do so, I think that makes sense.
We have the money to do that.
Makes sense. You mentioned that the refuse expenses, you felt like you had them under control, but they came in projected, actuals were higher than budgeted, and then the audited actuals were higher than that, by not a trivial amount. I mean,
No.
I mean, the amount that they've gone up over time, I mean, just in that period, I think it was a $300,000 jump. So it seemed like the revenue side seems like that's getting better, but the expense side doesn't. It didn't seem obviously apparent exactly how under control that really is.
It relates to the waste hauler contract. That's actually the increase because we budgeted $6.3 million, but our actual expense was $6.4 million. So the waste hauler contract was the one that caused the increase.
And what's driving that? Is that more households than we thought we would have, or what's driving that?
If I remember correctly, I believe the cost is based on CPI increases and also additional services, so I believe it's a couple of things, the CPI and then maybe more households and streets added to it.
Okay. But our projection should be able to account for that as well, right? So when we're budgeting or when we're doing the projections in May before the closeout of the fiscal year, we should be able to anticipate that.
Absolutely.
Because
And
we know with CPI and our own household number as well as Waste Management knows.
And we projected a little higher. If you see, we projected about 6.5 million, and we are about 6.4 million actual, so.
Okay. And I can't see because
Yeah, so we do
I'm
become.
looking at you right now.
Could
on
you-
the screen.
Yeah, so we're over budget, but we're under projected.
Under projected,
And
yes.
so I don't know if if the budget, we didn't anticipate either the growth we were incorrect in the number or the CPI. We were fairly close on the projected, and you're correct. I think I misspoke when I said we're controlling expenses. I mean, the expenses haven't gone up radically. They seem to be relatively flat. And so that's, with the increase in revenue, we're seeing, the bleeding is slowing down. But you're right, it's not a balanced fund at this point. And that's why we just wanted to at least let you know, okay, it's not balanced. We look like we're gonna have a couple $100,000 a year. That means instead of 4 years, it's 8 years when we run out of money. So as we look at the rate studies, we'll have to and as we look at the new waste hauler contract, we have to put that into this context, which I believe is coming back actually on the 21st. So we thought it was important to sort of see where you are, so when you look at that contract, you can put it into that context.
And for community development and public works, is I think it's my last question. In terms of the debt, essentially, I've never understood exactly how we would anticipate paying that back, given that we can't charge more than the cost of the service. But so if I've already paid a set of fees in the community development department for a development project that for market reasons or whatever is on hold, but comes out of the ground 2 years from now, or or I had a fee deferral, that sort of thing. If the fees come in later, I think you mentioned, you touched on this, but if the fees come in later, that simply shows that'll just show up as surplus revenue?
Yes.
Because the work was done by community development prior
Yes.
to this fiscal year. The revenue will come in later, and it will show up as surplus revenue, and in what way, who will see that?
Well, right now, the money would be in either community development fund or it'd be in the public works engineering fund. And then the council would have the ability to move that money.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I know we'd have the legal
Yeah,
authority to
right.
do that,
I'm-
but
I'm
how
just-
will we know if that occurs? Will we know that that's happened and it'll be flagged in some way? This was revenue for prior years' expenses?
Yes, I'm telling you, that's what staff is going to watch that, because once we zero it out, we want to do two things. We want to follow the revenue and expenditures on a year-to-year basis, what the work is, what money's come in during that year, what projects they've done outside of those departments, so we know if the money the supplemental money is adequate. And we should also, at the exact same time, monitor any money that comes in from prior year's projects, because they shouldn't get credit for that if if the revenues are not matching expenditures and they're only using money from a prior project to balance their budget. We should know that, and we should certainly make sure that the council knows that, so the council can, because what's happening is if we have $500,000 from a 2-year-ago project that's causing us to be at zero, we really have a $500,000 operating problem that we need to address. So the idea is at the end of this year, for the two department heads and finance to sit down and do that analysis, bring it to council and let you know how we're doing. So if we have a structural problem or operating problem, we'll identify it early and decide, is there something we need to do?
All right, including us being a better customer of our own departments.
Exactly.
Right. So, that is part of the issue. I mean, our own demands from the council and the manager and the non-billable work that is important and essential to our strategic plan. We need to assure that we're paying our fair share as well. So.
Both directors have been very good. They've said, if the amount that's allocated is $150,000 and we only do $100,000 worth of work, then general fund needs to get that $50,000 back. But if we're doing $250 because we're all asking them to do stuff, then we have to understand that that's going to have to come from someplace.
Ms. Sandin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Wright, for the presentation. I would agree with the mayor about the consideration of replenishing the reserve fund from the COPS grant with the cash balance. So I would agree with that move. And I also appreciate I was interested in the write-offs and how that works. I appreciate you kind of walking us through that. So with that, those were my question was about the write-off in particular.
I'm fine.
And I don't believe we need a vote on any of these items. If we
No,
have
we
direction
don't.
from council,
Yeah.
these are things that, quite frankly, finance used to do without bringing them to council, and
Yes.
staff believes that these should be council-driven decisions. And so we want to make sure we bring these things to you, and before we move the money, and then you tell us it's okay, we'll move it.
All right, great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, item 10 is consideration of Resolution 15-57, supporting implementation of the pre-qualified architectural submittal system. Pass. Mr. Goodwin?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm excited to present an innovative program I've been lucky enough to be a part of as a member of the steering committee over the past year, since January. I was called by the chamber, the executive director yesterday, asking to have this item moved. I have been to the chamber prior, a week or two ago, talked to the board about this item, and I will go back to the chamber, their Government Affairs Committee, next week. The PASS program is a collaborative program that has been put together through associations, the Sacramento Valley Association of Building Officials and the American Institute of Architects, Central Valley chapter. And it is a program that is very simple in concept and has great promise in scope. I failed to mention I do have a PowerPoint, but I'm trying to keep this short and sweet. And the concepts are very straight ahead. The program is a list. That's an agreed upon list between building officials, building divisions and departments, and architects. The program resides with the American Institute of Architects Central Valley office. It's maintained by architects, and it does not change any of the current processes or relationships that we have. The pilot program that I've presented to you through a resolution and asked you to vote on tonight is specifically for tenant improvements. And it's not limited in size of tenant improvements, but it's targeted at tenant improvements with the hopes of rolling this out, that at a later date we can look at new buildings and additions, remodels, et cetera. Quoting myself, and this has been used in other presentations, PASS is a collaborative process that increases the efficiency of permit processes, doesn't change any existing roles or processes, will not increase risk or liability for the professional, and will save owners, contractors, developers, jurisdictions, time, and money. The list that I mentioned earlier has been fully vetted over the past 7 or 8 months with the AIA and with Savabo. And through that collaboration, that list is used by the architect. The architect attends 2 classes, being trained in the process. There's a small fee to maintain the program of less than $200. And that architect is on the list, the PASS list, and uses the pass logo. And when a tenant improvement project comes in, they use that pass logo. And that notifies the front desk, it notifies the plans examiner that it's an understood process. And the hope is, we haven't actually done it yet. I don't know if any jurisdiction has a pass project yet. Roseville rolled this out about a month ago. That as a recognized process, we can get through with hopefully one plan check set of comments, two at the most. With that, I'll open it to questions and any further detail you'd like me to talk about.
I need more detail. I don't quite understand the system yet. I understand what it doesn't
All right.
do and who's collaborated on it, but what in relationship to our, I get it's a common set of document standards, maybe it's a common portal, a common set of trained folks. How does that then relate to, if there are differences between the way we do things here and the way they happen in Roseville? How does that get translated, or does it through this system? And
The collaboration was with a number of jurisdictions, and we've agreed with the AIA that we will use the list, the pass list, and that we'll all use it in this pilot program for tenant improvements. And so the list itself is a matrix of code requirements. It is not a directive on working documents layout. It is simply a list of required code information that is pre-vetted by the architect, checked off, and given to the building division or building department. And with that, there's an understanding that they've done the work behind the matrix. And the hope is that that is confirmed through the plans examination process, and the plan check is quicker, faster, more expeditious. If the architect just uses the system to expedite but doesn't truly include all the recommended items in the list, then that architect is warned, and they have two chances. It goes back to the various committees. They're put on the naughty list, I guess we could call it. And if they do it a third time, they're off. They're no longer a pass architect. I didn't answer your question.
I'm getting there, but it's what I'm missing is like the actual, like if I were like to make this computer program, like what's the actual thing here? What's the theory of action? What is this doing? I mean, I understand the some of the external features, but what are we? Is this like a trade agreement? Have we agreed with a bunch of other jurisdictions we'll use a common set of
It's
something?
We've agreed with the AIA and Sac Valley Association of Building Officials and other jurisdictions to use a specific matrix for tenant improvements. And that matrix is the basis, the body of the program. And it's a matrix that was vetted by building officials, plans examiners, and architects.
Okay, the process,
that.
how it
Okay.
was made and who was involved, I get all that.
All right.
But what's in the matrix then? What's the rows and the columns of the matrix?
It is a list of code requirements, starting out from accessibility to egress to fire safety. It takes the plans examiner and the architect through a very iterative process of putting together a set of working documents for a TI. So it's standardized, it's understood, and it's the base is the California Building Code with a regional understanding of how that's applied to tenant improvements.
Okay, so pre-pass or outside of pass for the same set of building standards that are based on the same California Building Code.
Right.
we in Rancho Cordova might have somewhat different matrix, just different enough to really screw you up if you're an architect or a project developer. And this system is aligning those precisely.
Yes.
And that matrix then still is fully compliant with all of our codes and policies and regulations and administrative manual and everything else?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And how does that change over time? The matrix itself?
The matrix over time will be added to for different types of projects, larger projects, new projects. So the matrix as put together is a base, and that's why we started small with tenant improvements. It will grow in scope and requirements based on the building code.
And who owns it?
It's really, no one owns it. There is a nonprofit corporation that's been put together through the AIA, excuse me. I guess they own that. They're responsible for that. But it's not owned by the city of West Sacramento. It's not owned by the AIA. It's an agreed upon document that's out there for everyone to use. No one buys it. It's not proprietary. This document is on a website and can be used by anyone.
So if the document's changing over time, and let's say the next set of collaborators are not quite as collaborative, and there's a disagreement about whether an element of the matrix ought to change or stay the same or whatever, and there's multiple jurisdictions that have different approaches on that same issue, who decides that? And then does that still relate to, if I have to get certified as an architect in the past system, somebody's certifying me, somebody owns my certification as well?
Right. Well,
here's why I ask about this, because if the city contributes to a marketplace for what becomes an essential certification, and that certification is that certifying body has essentially the legal authority over what the content of the matrix is. It's not us. Then we are ceding future authority over something that we may or may not want to do. I mean, so I'm trying to get at the business, the legal business and financial issues of what the framework of this. I'm 100% behind. I think the work that y'all have been doing is outstanding, and this is a very necessary thing. But we also have to pay attention to the democratic, legal, financial liability issues and governance issues that are at play here. And even if we're going to decide is, okay, we don't need to deal with those, we need at least to ID them in the first place. So that's what I'm trying to understand is because I've seen plenty of these collaborative efforts at a point in time are not collaborative. There is a disagreement that happens that cannot always be resolved by yet another hour at with the butcher paper.
right.
And then what happens? And so that's why I'm asking about this issue of ownership and the role of AIA and the role of jurisdictions like ours.
Any jurisdiction can withdraw and not participate. We are not required by any legal authority. It is maintained by Sac Valley Association of Building Officials and AIA. They've got ad hoc subcommittees specifically for PASS. And those are the committees that vet this with the steering committee that put this together. If this group passes, excuse my poor pun, but moves on, the matrix stays where it is. It doesn't change, and we can, as a jurisdiction, decide not to participate. It's really based on collaboration and participation. It will die a quiet death if there is not that collaboration and participation. And I'll defer to legal counsel regarding authority, but it's my understanding that this is really a piece of paper, an agreed upon document for all of us to provide better service for our customers. And that's where it stops.
But I mean, I'm only belaboring this because it doesn't seem like this has really been, these questions have been addressed in some other way, so I'm just, and they, but it is more than that because of this notion of certifying architects to this thing. I mean, it is more than just, the Port Huron statement by some thoughtful activist architects. I mean, there's a real structure here that looks like it's intended to be more, the green building system is a great example of this. So the green LEED certification is in many ways supplanted a role for government to set standards around green building, and with good impacts. But had we maybe that's not the path we would have chosen in government if we had thought through this in the first place. But it started in exactly the same way by exactly the same people. And then we're presented with a fait accompli. We can't exit it. We cannot exit the LEED program very effectively anymore.
Right.
Yes, it's voluntary. We don't have a role in it. But we, by acknowledging it, by embedding it in our own policies and our bridge district policies and everything else, we and thousands of other local governments created this thing that we can no longer, it's not reversible. And that is quite possible. If this is successful, this will be doing the same thing, which is why who has the residual legal authority does actually make some difference in terms of what that ownership looks like. And what is their obligation to consult with the local governments in the region, for example? Or do they have one at all? It sounds like that has not been thought through. And just as a student of democratic governance, just systems like this that are based on an assumption of permanent collaboration either fail or can often morph into something that is quite scarier than had you done nothing in the first place, because permanent collaboration is not a steady state equilibrium. Right. And when one architect can't bid on a project because they don't have this certification, because they didn't do the 2 classes or whatever, somebody will sue. So somebody's going to be owning this whether they want to or not. So I don't know I'm not sure I'm ready to vote for this tonight. Okay. And maybe that's fortuitous given the Chamber's interest in reviewing it as well. But I really would like to understand, more about the business aspects of this approach, given that the idea, the concept that GSAC has been promoting and that we've all supported long before that as well, I want to get to as well. And if this seems like the most promising way to do that, but I do think we need to get the business terms thought through a little better. As we're moving to implementation. I'm not suggesting a 1-year study period or a task force, but as we're moving towards how to implement it, we need to be looking at some of these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Rare, and thanks for the presentation. I am for thinking about efficiencies and streamlining, and appreciate your work and the steering. It sounds like you've been involved with the steering committee. I do have some questions because you mentioned a pilot, kind of piloting this,
right? And
I'm not really. So it probably will need to come back, because I'm just not seeing the outlines of what the pilot time period, kind of how we might evaluate it. Is this a good thing or not? So I think I just need to know a little bit more about that. And then for some reason because I don't know the reason for the call from the Chamber, I'm just kind of curious about that. I mean, one thing could be if you're controlling access to the pass, like who can take the pass program or how many of those are available, and you limit the number of folks who can kind of fly through, there might be some concern. But because I don't know what their concern is, I'm simply guessing. So I think maybe, again, I think maybe having come back, especially knowing more about a pilot project, because that's appealing to me. Like, how could we look at this, and could some of the questions the mayor brought up be addressed through kind of examination of that, like how would it live longer than a pilot period? I think that would be worthy of a discussion. So, but thank you for the work. Trying to do these things, I don't think is easy, although I think we all do want to have things that are easier for you, easier for folks that are trying to do work with us. I think that's the end goal.
It's really for our customers.
Right.
It's not for me. And it won't be limited, but these are fantastic questions. I appreciate them.
Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, Randy, do all tenant improvements need an architect?
Most, not all, no.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so either. And so if a tenant improvement does not need an architect, then the pass program wouldn't even apply to them. They would just come in and get a building permit or
Correct.
do whatever someone needs to do. Okay.
And those are fairly simple, those.
No, I
yeah.
understand.
So-
I understand.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're trying to do seems to be a good thing. When I see these kinds of programs, I get a little concerned that, we'll say the architectural community, for instance, they're trying to skew it so that every project has to have their kind of fingerprints or something on it so that they get a little piece of the pie. But I mean, at the same time, I think you guys have thought this through, and if you can get the questions asked or answered, then I think that this would be something that's good.
These are great questions. I really appreciate it. They haven't been asked, and I will take them back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I
All right.
did
Appreciate
have one
it.
more,
Ms.
sorry.
Amy, Sorry.
I think the, hearing about the interest in making this easier for a client, but I also I would love it if in this effort, did help your office. So that would be a great goal as well. I mean, to make it easier all the way around. So if there are any things that do tip toward that, I'd love to hear more.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one way to approach the question was if you took your hat off and put a traditional building official hat on and tell us all the reasons why you would, what scares you about this, and then how you've dealt with them, would give me. You've been so central to this work, not just for the city, but regionally. I knew when you walked up that you were already a champion for it. But having that lens of, okay, no, what would a regular bureaucratic, stodgy, anti-change building official say about this project would be helpful too. So.
Okay.
The chamber piece, I really appreciate because we're one of the investors in the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and Mr. Tuttle's on the board, and I think it's important that we convey to the chamber that is a supplement to the relationship, the very strong relationship and bond that we have with them, and that we before taking action that we want to be sure that an issue that is clearly have been longstanding interest in them. That they're still our core partners. So appreciate it. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
I neglected to ask the clerk to call the roll on two of our items that we've already cast voice votes on. So we can return to a voice vote on item 4, I believe item 4 and item 8. Is that right?
We can. We don't have to have a voice vote. We don't have to have a roll call vote as long as the clerk is comfortable that she knows what the vote was.
Are you comfortable that you got all three members present on items 4 and 8? And we didn't vote on 10? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your compelling flexibility, Mr. City Attorney. All right, item 11 is an informational report on the Startups and Residents Program. Mr. Robinson. And as Mr. Robinson's coming up, if members of the council didn't have a chance to see, or members of the public, Mr. Robinson's presentation at the Code for America Summit, the National Summit last week in Oakland, where Mr. Robinson and Grant Smith, one of the 3 fellows that were in residence here in Sacramento and worked on our food systems project. Mr. Robinson did an outstanding job presenting to a nationwide audience of technologists and investors and other governments and I'm serious, and fellows. He really did about the work of the fellowship, about the specific apps of Farm Stand and Acres, but also about, and obviously covering this in his presentation, but also in the impact of the Code for America and the iterative approach to design and implementation and how it's changing the city government as well. So he did an outstanding job. He was a great representative for West Sacramento. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we will be continuing the work on the Code for America project. The development phase of that is kind of winding down, so we have the opportunity to begin work on another project that implements the council's innovation direction from your strategic planning session in 2015, which is the Startups and Residents program. Startups and Residents is a partnership with the cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Leandro. The project's being managed out of the Mayor's Office for Civic Innovation in San Francisco. The purpose of the project is to help municipalities solve problems using technology, and by doing that, by bringing in technology companies from all over the world and give them the opportunity to enter the civic tech marketplace. The idea is that the participating cities will be asked to identify challenges or pain points that staff is experiencing in their daily work and try and find ways that those can be solved with technological solutions that would be within the powers of these companies to help us with. The city of San Francisco then would issue a request for proposals worldwide for startup tech companies, smaller tech companies who work in fields that would be relevant to the problems that we identify. And then the participating jurisdictions will have the opportunity to select a firm that best fits the problems that we've identified. And then after that, the companies that we've selected would work with the appropriate staff for a period of months starting in January 2016, and they'd benefit from the feedback that our staff would provide. They'd use that to refine their products. The city of San Francisco did a similar project called Entrepreneurship in Residence in 2014, and some of the products from that are summarized in the attachment to your report, but those companies came up with some amazing products, some of which they're actually using in San Francisco now. I wanted to note that the city would be under no obligation to purchase the software that these guys produce. The value would come from their listening to our staff and getting that user feedback directly from our staff. Also, the administration of this program is being handled by the city of San Francisco under a grant that they received from EDA, so there's no financial obligation to the city to participate either. We see a number of potential benefits to the program. One, staff will get insights into our own problems, which sounds kind of silly, but sometimes you get too close to something, and it can be very helpful to have someone from the outside come in and look at that, especially someone from the private sector who has a different perspective. As the mayor alluded to, we'll have also the opportunity to learn from the agile development practices that these firms bring, and we do try and pay attention when we're interacting with these folks and learn those lessons and apply those to our work. There's a lot of potential for positive publicity here. I think it's good news for everybody when the private and the public sectors collaborate to make government work better. That would definitely be what's happening here. And then finally, like I mentioned, we would have the opportunity but not the obligation to purchase the software that results from this. And that's an intriguing possibility because it'd be very unique that these products will have been developed with direct input from our own staff and very relevant to our own problems. So there's a schedule for the project in your staff report. We're expecting the call for startups to go out this month, the selection process to be concluded in December, and then the collaborative work with the tech startups between January and April, and then kind of the show and tell phase of the project in May and June, and the project will be complete in June of 2016. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? It's great stuff. This is really good. The city manager had innovation across the city government as a key management priority for the year and beyond, and innovation strategy that we've heard before. This was an essential part of that, using the opportunity of the Code for America Fellowship and the lenses that was putting on our city to really leverage some additional opportunities. This is a great example of that. We never would have made the connection with either the city of San Francisco or Oakland, but also with the technologists, with the companies, with the USC EDA, if it hadn't been for the Code for America project. But this has a huge amount of potential for all the reasons that Mr. Robinson mentioned, and many, many more in terms of stoking the local technology community here, and stoking that notion of West Sacramento and the Sacramento urban core as an opportune place for startups of this kind. So and as has been said, there's essentially no obligations here. So I'm a huge fan of this project, and really congratulations, Mr. Robinson and Mr. Tuttle, for putting this together. All right, thanks. All right, that brings us to item 12, which is consideration of agreement between the city and Federico Diaz for a public art installation in the Bridge District.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to introduce Shelley Willis, Director of the Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission. She's sitting with us in the front row there. She's joining us tonight to present the final art proposals. She has been supporting the city in our art acquisition process under a contract with Sacramento and doing a really great job, and I will turn it over to her after a brief overview. Tonight, staff is recommending that council authorize the city manager to execute the agreement between Federico Diaz and the city to authorize the city manager to take all actions necessary to implement the agreement for an art installation in the Bridge District Riverwalk. On November 19th, 2014, council executed an agreement with California Housing and Community Development for approximately $395,000 of housing-related parks grant funding for public art in the Bridge District, and this was matched with $200,000 of CFD 27 funds. The Bridge District Riverwalk qualified for this funding due to the completion of the Rivermark residential project, which is restricted to low and very low income households. Long-term land use and financing plans for the Bridge District incorporate art improvements and festival spaces as essential placemaking amenities to create visual connections between the interior areas of the district and the Riverwalk, to create a distinct identity for the district, and to support TOD patterns of development. In general, these improvements will occur through a public-private dialogue and coincide with private development projects. The city's first acquisition was the 2 June Kaneko sculptures that connect Garden Park with the Riverwalk, or will visually connect those two when the second Kaneko sculpture is installed. The HRP-funded art is to be installed on the Riverwalk on the city-owned property. On March 30th of 2015, the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Commission heard a presentation on the art acquisition process and recommended the public art acquisition process to council. On May 6th of 2015, council approved the art acquisition process. On June 1st, a request for artist proposals was released by the city. Extensive local outreach was completed at that time, including outreach to UC Davis, Los Rios Community Colleges, Sacramento State art professors. Regional arts councils and commissions were asked to publicize the invitation. Panelists were asked to send the invitation to artists. Over 20 local qualified artists within the SACOG region were contacted directly. The RFP was posted on the Public Art Network listserv, and a media release to local news outlets was picked up by a radio station, a TV station, and the Sacramento Bee. On June 25th of 2015, the Bridge District Public Art Panel reviewed 87 qualified applications, including 32 local artists. The prior work of each artist was thoroughly considered by the panel in light of the specific goals for this project and this site. The panel unanimously selected 5 finalists to create a conceptual proposal for the city of West Sacramento specific to the Bridge District Riverwalk site. On June 29th of 2015, the Arts and Culture and Historic Preservation Commission received a status update on the HRP art selection process. On September 23rd, the panel was convened to interview the finalists and select a winning proposal. The proposed sculpture, titled Subtile by Federico Diaz, was unanimously selected by the panel. River Soundings by Bill Fontana was selected as the alternate proposal for the project. Additionally, the panel suggested that the proposal titled West by Janet Zweig be allowed to be considered in the future by the Arts Commission and the city, and to compete in the future if art was incorporated into the Mill Street Pier when funding was secured for the pier. On September 28th, the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Commission unanimously recommended the art proposal by Federico Diaz to the council. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Shelley, and she's going to provide you some visuals on the final art proposals that were received.
Turn this on. Oh, it's on. Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm pleased to be here tonight, and I just want to say how appreciative I've been to work on this project, especially with Katie. She's amazing to work with and a true visionary. So it's been an exciting experience for me. So as Katie said, on the 23rd, the panel met. And I just wanted to let you know that the panel was comprised of arts professionals, but also members of the community where the artwork will be located, and members of the commission, of course. So I'm going to go through the 5 finalist proposals and, of course, the winning proposal. And I'm going to start with John Bisbee. Katie's going to run the slides for me. guess that dates me, slides. So John Bisbee is, very prolific. He's a public artist and has a studio practice that's been functioning for over 3 decades. He mostly welds these large spikes together into these large-scale sculptures and installations. I show these 2 past works. You can go to the next slide. Because the series of 3 sculptures that he proposed would be made in a similar fashion to these sculptures. So you can go to the next slide. The sculptures titled Acorn, Fir, and Roe are made by pounding, blunting, smoothing, and shaping. You can go to the next slide, Katie. And shaping thousands of spikes into various forms. The form of each sculpture relates to the Riverwalk site. Bisbee proposed to create the sculptures by pounding and weaving nails into the shape of an acorn, a tree stump that looks like it has been uprooted and stranded on the banks of the river, and an abstract sculpture with a dotted surface that was inspired by salmon eggs. All of these sculptures would be very large and be placed like breadcrumbs along the riverfront. So next slide. The second design by Stephen Fairfield is titled Moray Color Field. Stephen Fairfield is the lead artist of New Media Public Art Collective, a team of artists including an electrical engineer, an industrial designer, and 2 Arizona State University professors who specialize in animation, motion graphics, visual effects, and digital projection technology. The proposed Moray Color Fields is a series of 3 abstract and interactive sculptures installed along the Riverwalk. Made of steel and creating archways over the sidewalk, the sculptures are similar in scale, configuration, and style. By day, overlapping layers of stainless steel, tubular girds create moire patterns. At night, as people approach, the sculpture's motion sensors would trigger color light displays and transform the sculptures from ambient color and patterns into washes of color, sweeping over the surfaces of the sculptures and creating changing colored fields on the ground around each one. Next slide. And the next slide. The internationally renowned Bill Fontana was selected as the alternate for the Riverwalk project. In a career spanning 40 years, Fontana's sound sculptures use the urban environment as a living source of musical information, all with the potential to conjure up visual imagery in the mind of the listener. He has made works all over the world and has presented his sound sculptures extensively, including at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York and the Tate Modern in London. For this site, Fontana proposed river surroundings. Again, he wanted to create 3 portals that these sound installations would be located at. The sound component would be marked visibly by these portables that create a zone for changing mixes of environmental sound. The sounds would be recorded from various natural environments of the Sacramento River that evoke a sense of the river's sonic soul. Sonic soul, that's his words, not mine. The sound portals would include seating, multiple vertical posts, you can go to the next slide, Katie, that recall the reeds that grow in the river, and an acoustical sound wall. I want to pause here to say that, Bill is a sound artist, so we had a really short deadline to give these artists to create their proposals, and he did hire an architect to work, with to create this conceptual design. But he made it clear in his presentation this was just his first shot at it, and he knew that he would have to work closely with staff if he were selected and the community to really figure out what was the right architectural form to contain the sound for the piece. A major aspect of his artwork is the extensive field research and recordings to be made starting with the winter bird migrations in the Sacramento region. Other possible areas of research were the river, the delta, and the sources of the river near and at Shasta Lake, as well as areas along the upper Sacramento River. The recordings, of course, would be edited and used to create hundreds of surround mixes, put into playlists that also have alternating intervals of varying duration of silence. So, in other words, he's not just capturing the sound of the birds. He's taking all these various sounds and activities of that place, and then he's mixing them. I sort of describe him as a composer. He's taking all these sounds and making a bit of music in a way. So it's a very complex process. All right, next slide. Janet Zweig is the only artist that proposed a project for the pier located on the south end of the Riverwalk. You can go to the next slide. Zweig primarily works in the public realm. Her most recently installed public works include a performance space in a prairie on a Kansas City downtown green roof, a series of kinetic works in Milwaukee, a generative sentence on a wall in downtown Columbus, a sentence-generating sculpture for an engineering school in Orlando, and a memorial in the lawn of Mellon Park in Pittsburgh. Zweig has a major installation at the Prince Street Station in New York City. West, the proposed artwork for the Bridge District, is installed on the Riverwalk Pier. The artwork has two parts. I'll explain the first one. The artist proposes to create a single word, West, out of wood, steel, and lighting, and install it at the end of the pier on a seating element that anyone can move into 3 different positions. And this is a tried and true mechanism. I don't know if any of you have been to the High Line in New York, but you can sit on benches and lounges that can be moved on the railroad track. So she was proposing something similar to that, to move this sign in and around the pier. So she wants the word west to be to have the ability to move it in 3 different directions. So it's meant to orient the viewer and to change that orientation depending on where the viewer is located and how the word is positioned. So in other words, if the word west is pointing towards West Sacramento, the community of West Sacramento becomes the subject. If it's turning north towards Sacramento, then it's really saying, yes, we're here, we're West Sacramento. But what I find really interesting too is that, of course, we're all in the West, right? So it's really about this idea of orientation and location and site and what that means. And plus, it's sort of ironic in a sense. It has a bit of humor. So the second part of the project is really interesting too, because it takes, you can move to the band part. Go to the one before. So there are these, have all of you been down there? You're probably really familiar with the site, but there are these pilings that have existed for a really long time, and I know Katie has been approached to try to remove them, and the cost of that is really, I'm sure, high. So Janet decided to use them as a way of marking the level of the river, and so and make them more beautiful and also more connected to the pier itself. So she did some research, and it turns out that there is a way to determine the zero level of the water in the river, and she proposed to make these bands that circle around the pilings all the way up, and actually beyond the pilings onto the sign that mark the river every 3 feet, so that, again, people that are boating, people who are across the river, people that are in and around the pier can monitor the level of the flow of the river. So there's a detail of that band. So go ahead, let's go to Federico. So finally, the winning proposal is by Federico Diaz and is titled Subtile. Federico Diaz uses new media or work made with technology to make invisible aspects of the natural environment or any environment visible. His work has been exhibited internationally at the Venice Biennale, the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo, and the Institute of Contemporary Arts London, among many, many others. He is currently the head of the Super Media Studio at the Academy of Arts, Architecture, and Design in Prague. I'm including 2 examples of his past work because of their relationship to the project he is proposing for the city of West Sacramento. This first artwork, go back to the one that looks like milk, was made by him. I'm not really good with technology, but he uses algorithms in this case, he created an algorithm that would translate a voice into a three-dimensional sculpture. So this is the visual of someone speaking. So go to the next slide. This piece is a similar idea where he is trying to create a three-dimensional way of seeing the movement of people throughout the building that this sculpture is in front of. So this algorithm that he created would connect to this production mechanism for these black balls that would be spit out and eventually form this installation that you see here. So what he proposes for Sacramento, or West Sacramento, is this large sculpture. It would be approximately 26 feet by 9 feet by 6 feet and made with thousands of small reflective stainless steel tiles that form an abstract shape that, go to the next slide, that I think sort of looks like a cloud or the top of a tree. Now, the thing is, really don't know exactly what it would look like or what sort of information he is going to use to create the sculpture. So that would all take place in the final design phase of the project. So the artist, put the piece at this site, but Katie has more information about the site that we're thinking that it should be located. And he, of course, would work very closely with city staff. And he's talked about if his project is approved, that he would hire a landscape architect or work with a landscape architect to really create an installation that's seamless and looks like it's always been there by the river. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions along with Katie's help about the process or these projects.
Are there questions this time?
I guess the only question that I have is, who's going to choose the artist? We? Are we going to, or does...
The process that was approved by the council has the panel selecting the artist and then the final proposals coming forward so that you can see the finalist proposals. And then council's role is to overview the process and then to approve the contract with the artist.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have a question. I want to bifurcate our conversations. I would like to have us take up this item for the recommended action and then have a subsequent conversation on the same topic. I mean, on the same item, but in terms of the process, the lessons about this process in particular. But don't want to confuse the two issues or the excitement about what's being proposed here. But I do think we need to have a conversation about the process as well. All right, thank you. If there's no other questions. Did you have anything further, Katie?
No, I believe there's a request.
Yes, there is. I've got that handled. Thanks. All right, because we've got one member of the panel joining us for the evening about the proposed project. Mr. Friedman, welcome.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Christoph, Ms. Sandine, it's nice to see you this evening. I'm here to express my enthusiastic support for the work of Federico Diaz. I should make clear I was not a part of the panel.
I'm mixing you up with Stephen.
But had the opportunity to view the work and think it's terrific. Before I explain why, I would like to express my appreciation to Katie and the city for, number one, just being so in front of attracting resources to bring work like this to the Bridge District. It's incredibly important to me as a developer of that project to have the kind of support that you all do to help make this a terrific place. And I'd also like to thank Shelley for conducting what I think is an incredible process in bringing so many noted artists to the table. What I like about the work that is being recommended this evening is that it's just really cool. Now, I know that that's not exactly a technical term, and so let me explain to you a little bit why I like it. In the first place, I think it's enigmatic, it's mysterious, and it's very interesting. when you look at it in the horizon, it's at some level going to kind of disappear. So if you imagine watching cable TV when your signal goes out and things start to pixelate, I think as you look at the horizon, it's almost going to be a smudge where it fits into the landscape, but there's something not quite right about it. And as the breeze hits those tiles, I think it'll create a really, really interesting visual. But beyond the visual, I am very, very interested in sort of the underlying concept about how Mr. Diaz creates his work. As Shelley indicated, he basically is trying to make visible hidden forces that, you know, influence all of us, and essentially hidden physical forces. So if you think about all of us sitting here in this room right now, there are photons from the light, you know, bouncing off of the furniture. My voice is being transmitted to you, you know, via a wave. The air in the room is, you know, circulating as well. And so what Mr. Diaz does is he creates algorithms to basically map these hidden forces and make them visible. And what I think is so cool about this particular piece is that what he's proposed to do is to map the climatic changes that take place on the water's edge, the delta breeze, and you know, to give it visual form in this cloud-like object. So it's, I think, incredibly cool that we have a work by an international artist that is very, very site-specific. It is literally created, you know, out of the circumstances that exist on that site. So I enthusiastically support it and hope you will as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Council discussion? Sandine?
I don't want to mix up the two pieces of the discussion, but I have to say, when I was reading through the staff report, it was just, to me, it was so inspiring that we were attracting the quality of internationally renowned work here, and I was just really excited and looking forward to the presentation tonight. So I'm in.
Well, I don't think we have a lot of choices to be in. We don't get to make the determination or the choice. So, I mean, I think that this is fine. And, you know, I appreciate what Katie and all of her contacts have done in order to make all of this happen. So I think we need to move forward. But I certainly would like to have some discussion, as I think Christopher has indicated, for a future project.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this piece of this artist, this art installation. It is, for all the reasons that both Ms. Sandine and Mr. Friedman and our staff have indicated, this is a very strong choice, makes a very strong statement on the riverfront in a part of the city and the urban core that is worthy of that, and attracting not just the winner, but really all the finalists were of a very high caliber. So I was very encouraged by that. So this is I first proposed a public art ordinance in West Sacramento in 1997 at this council, and I couldn't get a second, just for the concept. Like, could we have it on the agenda? And I certainly did not have this in mind. This wasn't something that we would have contemplated, but we had our small West Sacramento Art Guild, and the orchestra was just getting started. There were local citizens that were starting to bubble up interest in art, and there was a year or two where Second Saturday actually made it over here for a little bit. And I'm proud of where our city's come in terms of its appreciation and inspiration and its understanding of the relationship between art and placemaking and economic development and history and imagination and learning and reinforcing the West Sacramento kind of progress, notion of moving forward and progress and keep challenging and trying new things. So I'm excited about the project and this artist, and I'm fully prepared to move forward with the agreement as it is stated. Now, the agreement, action that's before us does not include any supplemental recommendations from the panel, because I'm not prepared to support those. The panel was not asked to make recommendations about future projects, only this particular one. but the recommendation that's here and the agreement that's before us, I think, is a strong one. So is there a motion on that?
I'll move the recommended action as stated in the item.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. So on this process, as we're just going through this for the first time, this has been an area of pretty significant concern to me. I think and in part it's because of that motion in 1997, and our community is on a journey, and part of the council's role has been to curate that journey and to make sure that it keeps moving forward. And so it is why even when the council made framing this process, the council, I thought, was very, very modern and urban and metropolitan in saying we are not expecting and don't intend to review the specific finalists, and we're not going to pick artists. We're not going to be that kind of council that says, okay, it can't be orange. That's not going to be what we do. We want a process that is criteria-based in terms of what we're trying to achieve and our objectives, that we have to give the final approval for the spending and all of that, but that we're not inserting ourselves in that work with the very clear set of criteria around what we are trying to accomplish. That criteria that was in the grant with respect to economic development and some of the things I just mentioned around placemaking and what have you, and around the advancement of the arts, but also this council was very clear about the advancement of the local and regional arts community, and not just as a abstract because we care about arts, but because we are affirmatively trying to build an arts as an economic development strategy, art production creation as an economic and workforce strategy in our community. But again, the council, I thought, was extraordinarily and uniquely mature in this regard, to not say, okay, and it must be a local artist, because these are a balance of issues around. There's a great value to having internationally prominent artists. There's also great value to local artists, and they are not. And predetermining which one we might have, the council said we're not going to try to do that. But we want to see local artists, in the mix. We want to know that they got a strong shot in that process, and then what emerges, we will accept, kind of like a trade agreement that the president negotiates. Here's our criteria. Go do your best, and then. And that's not how this process has proceeded. It didn't proceed this way. With a fealty or fidelity to that notion of local artist economic development being a central focus, or the West Sacramento place being the place of interest and not the region, and all by good individual people doing good individual things. But in terms of the curating of this process in a way that reinforced that policy framework, so that at the end of the day, when we said, did we make the right decision by not being one of those micromanaging, nitpicky, non-artist art overseeing councils, that we would say, yes, this was we would have done the same thing if we had your knowledge and expertise and time. And I don't think that's really what happened. And my understanding is the way the panel looked at it, and there were a lot of qualified local artists that put their name in, but didn't survive the first cut under the notion that those that were good had already had installations in the area, not in West Sacramento, but in other parts of the area, and therefore that we'd already seen their work, and that's a legitimate consideration in the end. It wasn't, but it was the result of that framing of the issue of our very first major gigantic on view at the riverfront art project. That's too limiting, and it meant that we had no local artists were considered. None of them are finalists. None of them were interviewed. None of them got the stipend to kind of conceive of what a project might look like. And so the process of the panel, the process of having a Sacramento-based consultant guide the process, and then the process of giving us an all or nothing, up or down vote at the end, all of which I supported, was called into question by that process. And I thought, because we couldn't have been clearer at council at the beginning, because we didn't have that many questions. We didn't have that many parameters on. All we said, this is the one thing we need you to pay attention to. We're not going to be the Sacramento City Council and have a debate about forcing you to pick this artist or that artist, or insisting that it be a West Sacramento artist or even a Sacramento one. But we need to see this this represented. And I just don't feel like that really happened. Again, not through any ill will, and we're under a huge time constraint on this process. So a lot of pressure on staff and on the panel to be able to deliver. So this is not a forensic evaluation of what somebody did wrong. Nobody did. But in terms of how we look at this process into the future, I would not vote to do this again this way. Without some either more explicit, direct policy provisions that would provide maybe more necessarily clear direction about our objectives, or without some additional touch points with the council, because it seemed like this spun out of our framework almost within the first week, and there was just no time for us to get it back on, and it didn't come back to us until the very end. So, I don't know, Mr. Kristoff, do you have process comments too, or?
No, it's just that I think you're headed in the right direction, but I would like to be able to have more local artists and more local input into the whole process. I think the fact that this went out nationwide, in some respects worldwide, it got away from us. But at the same time, I think what we've got is we've got a good product. But I would like to see if there's a way we can include local artists along the way so that we may be able to have some kind of, I mean, I really like the choices that were made. I thought they were dynamic. But I would really like to see some local participation in the whole thing.
Ms. Sandine?
I actually wasn't aware of some of the issues that you shared, so just giving me some food for thought, but perhaps, I mean, if we do have the opportunity, and this is a huge opportunity, perhaps we can think about touch points, again, without micromanaging. So that's a delicate balance to try to achieve, but I'm happy with the result. But if there are issues, I just wasn't aware of them along the way, but
Yeah,
we do need to be aware of them.
Yeah, I don't know whether more touch points is the right answer necessarily, and it may be that because I was happy with the outcome, but it can't be the outcome on every single thing. And if we go back to the Sacramento arts community and have them, curate this project, we're going to get the same result over and over and over again. Or we'll get a definition of local being, San Jose, which is also part of the concern that I've had. So we need to, setting the criteria more precisely, and boundaries, and also picking the right people at the table. Yes, there were, as I think was, there were, quote unquote, also some local people on the panel, but they were mostly, because I've talked to most of them about this frustration, and it almost instantly goes to here's a conversation among people who are really, really knowledgeable about art, and you're a member of the Arts Commission or whatever, and you care about it, but you're not at that level. And so they say, well, this has been done, this has been seen, here we have the opportunity to go here, and you almost instantly shut down as an effective contributor to that conversation. And so that's just a process design, and who's at the table, and it may be that okay, we've got if it's an art project of $500,000 or more, let's just go international. Let's just intentionally forget the local lens at all. Rather than having them compete together, locals are invited. But in this particular kind of a project, our primary interest is in making a splash globally and nationally, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. We do that all the time. All right, we built Rayleigh Field to do that, not only because we wanted to have the very best local Little League park. We want this is our national play. But then we have other projects where we have a particular local theme to them. But we need a framework, a criteria, policy-based framework for us to be able to drive that with more clarity than we did this time. And so I think that, to me, again, it's not a forensic thing. It's lessons learned from this process for how to get it more right each time as we go forward, and providing that forum for local artists, both because we care about local, we want there to be more local artists, and we want there to be a market for their work, and we want there to be a place where they can where they can make it big in their own town, their own region. And so it's not just a romantic attachment to the local. It's also really is a strategy around creating economic development pathways, and the kind of places that creative and artistic folks want to live and be because we support them. All right, that part of the discussion didn't need an action, but thank you. All right, and thanks to the team. Thanks for joining us this evening. All right, council calendar. Oh, Mr. Tuttle. This is our first council calendar.
It is my first council
It's not your
calendar.
first one, but it's our first.
I want to salute our firefighters and mention that the open house on Station 45 is Saturday at 10 o'clock. Also, on Saturday, the Latin America Festival has been canceled, so that was an event was planned for the Riverwalk. Their early sales were not on a level that they were hoping, and so they have canceled that event.
All right, any questions on the calendar? City manager report?
Just briefly, there was a memo at your seat in regard to next week's visit by Holland Knight. They'll be here on Wednesday, the 14th in the morning. If you're interested in meeting with our federal representatives, if you could let us know a time. We don't want more than 2 council members at the session, but if you could give us a time if you're interested, and we'll schedule that.
Great, all right. Any questions on city manager report? City attorney report? Staff direction from members of the council? We have no future agenda item requests, so is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. I was sitting over here trying to type. No, I was going so fast. And I was like.
Oh, per pay period.
Love it.
Yes, I can. Okay, that makes sense.